Okay, we have everybody here. So, thank you everybody for joining us for this conversation about what is Black conservatism. Normally, I do what is called a good faith space every Wednesday, but this was a special conversation that we wanted to do. Everybody agreed to talk about it. I think it's been a conversation between a bunch of Black conservatives on Twitter. So I'm glad to kind of moderate the conversation. Before we get started, let's just introduce everyone. We'll start with Aja. You want to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Aja Smith. I live here in beautiful Southern California. I am a Black conservative. I am a registered Republican, but a lot of my leanings are more toward libertarian and Constitution.
Okay, great. Barrington, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Barrington Martin II. I'm a former congressional candidate of the 5th District here in Georgia. If anybody know where that is, pretty much the basics and the heart of Atlanta. I'm the host of the Barrington Report on iHeartRadio and ATL Talks Radio. And I do a lot of writing and a lot of articles for different periodicals and ghostwrite as well. I don't like to classify myself as anything, although most of my views would lean towards conservatism. And I think that the main piece of the conversation that I want to have or just evolve my rhetoric around is understanding why we base or why we label a lot of these labels around race and things of that nature.
Okay, and we'll definitely get into all that. Jeff, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Jeff Charles. I'm the host of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. That's my podcast. I am also a contributor for redstate.com and libertynation.com. I've been in political commentary for about 5 years or so. And looking forward to chopping it up. I identify as conservative, but I'm mostly like a conservative libertarian type. So conservatarian. So just depending on the issue, I might lean more libertarian. Some I might lean more conservative. But yeah, looking to chop it up.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Kris, last but not least.
Yes, my name is Kris Williams. Most people call me K-Dub. I likewise am conservative. I center my conservatism around Christianity and the Bible. I'm probably most known for apologetics and also music. So yeah.
All right, thank you guys for introducing yourselves. And for people who aren't familiar with me, I'm the author of a book called Black Victim to Black Victor, which gives social critique about Black culture, as well as telling my personal story. I'm also the founder of Wrong Speak Publishing. So I'm a big advocate of free speech, free intellectual thought, and open criticisms about a bunch of different topics, including race. So we'll start with the main question. What is Black conservatism? The reason I'm asking this question is because I think everybody has their own perspective as to what conservatism is to them or how it affects their life, and what is the racial component to conservatism, or is there a racial component to conservatism? So I think I want to have like a groundwork to understand where everybody is coming from by asking this question. So Aja, you want to go first? What is Black conservatism to you?
Well, thank you. Also, I ran for Congress twice as well here in California. So when it comes to this conservatism, I look at the principles, and I look at the individual freedom, the free markets. I am more of a Milton Friedman type. So when you look at the conservative principles and you apply it to your community, which I am Black, both my parents are Black, my grandparents are Black, my family's from Louisiana and Baltimore, you start to look at the history of Black culture, Black American culture, and you start even going back to before we were shipped over here, we were slaves. And you start looking at the principles of conservatism and the history of America and how we reshaped and also contributed to America when it comes to literature, when it comes to music, when it comes to worship. because if you really look at the ground and how can I say it, the root or the spine of just the Black church. And I know Kris said he's into ministry. And so if you look at history, the Black church was always our go-to place. You go where the pastor tells you what's going on, even in town hall meetings. And when we actually started applying conservatism, maybe we didn't know we were conservative when we do self-reliance, when we start being business owners. You look at the history of the Black Wall Streets, there was more than one or two in America. The family structure, pretty much being a great community together. And of course, we know through history, those towns and those cities, they were taken away from us because of white supremacy. And when I started to get more into being a conservative and conservative principles, I started looking into my own family. I come from a single parent household, but I had wonderful grandparents who were there. We're a tight knit community in my own family. So I started to look at, okay, these principles apply to me and apply to how I see us as Black Americans. When you start looking at conservatism, even as a Black conservative, we are split into two different categories, fame and solutions. I don't know if people saw me ever tweet that. We look into what we contributed to America and how we can flourish and how we can gain better notoriety and more people to understand that when you say conservatism, you have to look at the core principles. But you even look at when it comes to different groups of people, even even if you look at, like, I live in a heavy Hispanic or Latino community here in Southern California. Even though they may vote Democrat, but they still have conservative principles. So when we talk about Black conservatives, we have to look at how we grew up, the history, what we contributed to, how we have a very tight family unit. We also can say demographically how we apply those principles depending on where we live. Southern states versus East Coast, West Coast, Midwest. You also look at the political, because we're also split. I'll admit we are very split as Black conservatives. And when it comes to how we fought for freedom, how we fought for justice, how we wanted to manage to start building our own communities by applying conservative principles. But when we start to do that, we're told that it sounds segregationist, but it's not. You look at other communities of color, such as the Asian community, the Jewish community, the Hispanic and Latino community. Nobody says a word to them when they do it for themselves. But when we do it, there's a fear. And I saw a lot of tweets going around saying, well, we shouldn't say we're Black. Well, you have to remember our category has been changed for so long. And so now we have the term, either you identify as African American or Black American. And those are the two basic ones. And you look at how we commingle, how we have this connection with one another. And it doesn't matter where we live, but we all know that, we came on different ships, but we are all on the same boat. And we're all fighting to have great freedom and the Constitution equally apply to us, especially in our communities. On the political spectrum, because I am a California Republican delegate, it's really teaching others who are in the party, especially in California, when you want to do outreach, how we message to each other. I live in California. I live in a Democrat district. My messaging to, the Black community, and to get people on board to understand that we've always had conservative principles, but being a Black American, being a Black conservative, we have to really start seeing that everything that we've done, everyday life, our family's history, we've always practiced conservatism. And like I said, everybody is different, but we always practice some type of conservatism. And just like I'll use for an example, church service. We, you have a white church and a black church. I was going to be flat out. You may go to a predominantly black church. You can go to TD Jakes, or one of my favorite pastors I used to love listening to was Bishop Price, Fred Price. And then you have Joel Osteen Church. We all could sing Amazing Grace, but we all sing it differently. So even with the principles, we tend to say, okay, we're not a monolith, but we do come together collectively when we want to fight for justice. We are definitely not a monolith, especially when it comes to political ideology. But even in my own ranks as a Black conservative or a Black Republican, we do have an issue where it's pretty much, well, we don't want to be called Black, or some of us do want to be called Black. And I've been seeing a lot of people argue over this, and it is frustrating because if you want to reach out to Black America as a whole, you're going to have to stop denying that we exist. And the individual freedom, how we incorporate our daily lives with our history and being proud of our history and heritage, that cannot be denied anymore. And I'm telling you, I don't know everybody's age group, but I'm one of those Gen Xers. And so seeing all of this pushed on social media, it was frustrating. And I didn't jump in the whole conversation with the tweets with Jeff because he did a great job with that one long tweet, that we have to figure out how we can work together. We may agree and disagree, but to deny our heritage and to deny what our parents and our grandparents and our forefathers as Black Americans, as slaves, have done for us, we need to take that torch and move forward so we can rebuild what we've lost, especially after Reconstruction and when white supremacy tore down what we tried to build.
Okay. You said a mouthful there, and I appreciate you giving me that information as far as how you view it. I'm going to go to Barrington next, but I want to address one thing you brought up. You brought up the fear component, and I think, I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for everybody else. I think the fear component, as far as looking at us as a collective, is because the collective part, and in some ways, has been used as a way to be separatist. Where it sounds like, from listening to you guys, it sounds like you just want an acknowledgement as a collective, but not necessarily to be used as a weapon to hate other people. And I can only speak from my perspective. When I see the left use Black people as a collective, in many aspects, it's used to weaponize against white people, against other people, to advocate for separatist type of life, in a complete one way of living, one way to exist, one way to be Black. It's almost like a toxic collectivist mindset. So I think that is the fear. It's the fear that on the right, with the conscious conservatives, that it's going to reflect the collectivist, separatist kind of mindset that exists on the left in some respects. And I think that's where it may be coming from. What do you have to say about that?
I see where you're going with it, and that's why I used an example. To me, I've been in this political theater for 20 years now. I'm that old. When people say, well, you sound like you're separatists. No, we're not separatists. We want to rebuild what we were trying to build after Reconstruction, because Reconstruction was the biggest failure. You don't say these things to other ethnic groups that come here. Like, I live in California, and of course I've been to New York and the East Coast plenty of times. You don't have a problem when other people come here. and they start their own communities. But when it comes to the Black community as a whole, regardless of political ideology, you have a problem with that. And I have a problem with that for you to have a problem with that. Because why is it's okay for an immigrant or anybody else to create their own little towns and their own little communities, and they do use conservative principles, but when we as Black Americans say, okay, we're going to start a Black owned bank, okay, what's wrong with that? I mean, if you look at who owns these banks, they're other ethnic groups. But when we say we're going to start a Black owned bank, it doesn't mean that only Black people could bank there. No, you have great people who know finance and banking that are going to own that. And anybody can bank there. Same thing with the Chinese community. Chinatown is in San Francisco, right, Northern California with me. I can still patronize there, but I'm not segregated there, but it's called Chinatown because they have pride of their cultural heritage. I can go to East LA and go to Little Italy. I can go to Little Armenia. I can go to many other cultural groups, communities, and be welcome and learn from those communities. Okay, my background too, I was also in the military. So I've done travel. I've been to the Middle East. And so it's no issue for me, and I don't know why it's an issue for a lot of people on the right. When we want to do something like that, we are being told you are wrong and you're segregationist. To me, that is a childish way of looking at it, because if you're on mainstream media with the pundits and you're complaining about why Black America is at the bottom and Black on Black crime and there's a huge Black wealth gap, well, let us do and correct those issues, because it's come to a point you're using the negatives instead of promoting the positives that we want to do and supporting us. So then we won't be your talking point constantly on TV, especially when it comes to community growth, having strong family values. Like I said, I came from a single parent home. So when I hear that there's no Black fathers in the home, that's false. If you go follow Adrian Norman, he did a great article on that with proof that 70% of Black men are in their children's lives. My dad was in my life. My parents were just divorced. So what? Big deal. Stuff happens. Not everybody's personal life can work out the way you want to mold it. But at the same time, if we want to do something as a collective and to have pride in it, we should be able to do without any type of ridicule or any type of feeling that we're guilty, because those of the people who are saying this, you're no better of the people you oppose. So which is it? If you're a Black Republican on this side of the aisle, if you don't want to identify as Black, like I said, that's fine with me, but don't ridicule me or anybody else that I know that want to do something different for us.
Okay, I completely understand. Barrington, you want to answer the question, what is Black conservatism to you?
I don't know what Black conservatism is, to be honest with you. I have issues, or rather, more so over the last couple of years, I've taken issue with using race before a title or before a label in order to, because in my opinion, it seems that you're trying to separate yourself from the whole. The reason I'm saying this is because if you look at most of America possesses conservative values. That is, traditional family values, traditional family structure, fiscal conservatism, also wanting the most minimal government interference in one's lives. So when we begin to place Black conservatism, white conservatism, on so and so forth, or these race labels in front of these titles, in my mind, to me, it seems that we're trying to create these alternate groups instead of remain unified into the whole. And in my estimation, that creates problem in the long run. For example, Asia, when you mentioned all those other communities, you didn't mention, or I don't know if you realize this, is that these other communities, Chinese, what is Italian, Armenia. These are countries. These are more than likely people who are immigrants from those countries. They are now in our country, and they're bringing the culture with them from those countries. Now, when you say, and I really want anyone to answer this question, and I ask this all the time. I know a lot of you guys are, that sounds crazy, but I really want an honest answer since we're all here now. When you say black, what does black mean, and what does white mean? Like, what are the we don't understand these as labels, and in my mind, these are labels used to indicate a type of person. Outside of that, when you actually unpack the actual definitions or actually ask yourself, like, what does this term means in describing me? What, like, you will start to see, in my estimation, that it's not the same as being a direct indicator of a country, so to speak. Does that make sense with anybody? What I'm saying?
Asia, if you can address it.
I can tell you from my experience, and even me working for the federal government and the military, what is America? America is everyone from every parts of the world. We were slaves, illegal immigrants, and immigrants. And you come here to live the American dream, and you bring your culture. And when people say, well, why do you have labels? Well, you have labels. Some people say, well, I have a label because I'm still proud of who I am and where I come from. And I'm bringing my cultural traditions here and to live the American dream. Now, some people say, well, I don't want the label. Okay, drop it. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But what I do have a problem is when people who want to drop the problem, now you're trying to deny my cultural heritage. You're trying to deny other people's cultural heritage, because at the end of the game, at the overall issue is that people are trying to redefine what our founding was as a whole, as a macro. I'm not going to get into the micro discussion tonight. I already did that with the Constitution. But you look at the traditions, even when European Americans came over here, they weren't classified as white automatically. They were classified as Irish, you're Jewish, you're German, you're Scot, until later on we had the classifications. So that's a whole nother topic and space right there. And so the whole construct started, and everybody was labeled different categories. You even look at the history when the immigrants came here from Ellis Island. They were actually stripped too from their identity. They were told, okay, you have to change your last name and change this and change that. But at the end of the day, they went home and they celebrated their traditions because it wasn't allowed to. Same thing with African Americans, Black Americans, all of us who have lineage from the Atlantic slave trade. Our ancestors were stripped from everything. And so when they came here, they did keep some traditions, they kept traditions, and so it got passed down to generations. It has nothing to do to deny that you're an American. First of all, as an American, that's a citizenship. And if you really want to get down to it, look at geography. Are you North American? Are you from South America or Central America? So so when you say you're an American, what part of America are you on this map? Same thing. Africa is not a country, it's a continent. You can go to Nigeria, they have a different tradition there. You can go to Ethiopia, they have a different tradition over there. My sister lived in Zambia for 15 years, just finally came back. She said it was a wonderful experience. And so everybody needs to understand, when you say you're an American, okay, great. That is your citizenship. If I was born in Mexico, I will be Mexican. And then if I come here, I will be a Mexican American. And so when I see people who say, well, American tradition is everybody's tradition that makes up, it's like a big quilt that everybody participates and to live freely and to do what they want to freely, especially people come here for religious persecution. Are we going to start denying people from practicing their religion when they come over here? Because this trend right here, that's what it really sounds like. Because I have a lot of Jewish friends who are concerned when they see that coming from the right, and they are on the right as well. Are we going to start telling them, no, you can't celebrate Hanukkah, you can't do this? And I have Muslim friends. They said, what, I can't celebrate Ramadan now? So when we say, well, you're an American, we're like a quilt. We all have something to participate to make this a great country and to learn from. But the bottom line is, yes, applying the Constitution equally applied. And if you like the conservative principles, great. You can apply that. You can use that. You can use that to grow and to be a better person.
Okay. I want to make sure we get to everybody here. Thank you, Barrington and Asia, for speaking your piece. Jeff, ask you the question: what is Black conservatism?
Yeah. So, and I think when you first asked the question, you were asking what conservative means, and then what is Black conservatism. So I'll answer both. But, yeah. So conservatism to me it's based on some fundamental principles, right? The idea of liberty, self-reliance, self-ownership, which is actually more of a libertarian principle, but I think conservatives and libertarians have that in common. The idea that you leave me alone, I leave you alone. Libertarians would call that the non-aggression principle. You don't aggress on me and I don't aggress on you. I think that's also a very foundational principle within conservatism. Free markets, the idea that the free markets should solve most problems. We limit government as much as possible and let the free market handle most of our problems. Government should plays a role, but it should not play the primary role in every single situation. When it comes to issues like defense and stuff like that, that's where the government can be involved. But with other issues, there shouldn't be too much undue regulation on businesses. There shouldn't be too many undue regulations on the individual. And I know we talked a little bit about the difference between the collective and the individual, and I'll hit on that just a little bit. But when it comes to Black conservatism, the Black conservatism to me, it's simple. We apply the principles that I just laid out to the issues that a lot of Black Americans face. So the idea is that we remove the obstacles that the government has placed in the past and the obstacles that they're placing right now to help prevent Black Americans from, say, closing the wealth gap or having a more quality education. I mean, if you look at education, what do we believe? School choice. School choice is actually a free market principle. If a school is not performing up to par, you're allowed to take your kid out of that school, either homeschool, send to a private school, or go to a better public school. So that addresses freedom, but it also addresses a free market mentality as well. When it comes to economics, I mean, we promote entrepreneurship. If we were to solve these problems that a lot of Black people face in Black communities, when it comes to entrepreneurship, well, what obstacles is your local government placing on Black people to keep them from helping to close that wealth gap? So there's a lot of other areas where this would apply, but that's just kind of a nutshell version of it. I did want to talk about the issue of collectivism. I think we do get too afraid of that word because we know how the hard left uses it. But talking about being part of Black culture is not necessarily collectivism, because if that's the case, then if you talk about American culture, then guess what? That's collectivism too. It's just a different type of collectivism. But when people talk about being part of American culture or Black culture, you don't necessarily have to jettison the idea of the individual. Now, the left does. That doesn't mean that we have to do it, right? Black culture has helped to shape who I am, but it's not all of who I am. American culture has helped to shape who I am, but it's not all of who I am. I have a lot of different other parts of my identity. I'm a Christian. I'm into nerd culture. I have a lot of different aspects about me because I am an individual, and I've been shaped by a lot of different things, just like we all have. And just before I stop here, I also wanted to address the issue of, why is it based on race, or or a lot like when we talk about Chinatown, or even Koreatown, or other areas where they are de facto segregated, even if that's not done by the government. The difference is that there are cultures that have blossomed from American cultures. A friend of mine, Carmine Sabia, he's an Italian American, and we were talking about this, and he straight up told me, Italian American culture is its own thing. Italian Americans they have very little in common with people who are actually from Italy. They have their own lingo, they have their own traditions, they have their own customs. And a lot of that happened because Italians were not treated very well in America either. They were also segregated, especially in the South. They were treated horribly. But even in other areas like New Jersey and New York, Carmine lives in New Jersey, and he tells me this culture sprang up because of how history happened. And you can't change history. It is what it is, right? You look at Native Americans. I mean, if you look at Cherokee, you actually have to have a certain level of Cherokee blood or Cherokee lineage to be considered a member of the Cherokee tribe. That's racial. Nobody complains about that. I've never heard a single complaint about that. I think it's okay to identify that way as long as the focus is more on culture and not so much on the phenotype, on the skin color. And I know that some people are obsessed with the skin color, but I do not believe that most Black people are. I don't think that most Native Americans are. I think that more normally when we're talking about the Black community or being Black or being proud to be Black, we're talking about our culture, our heritage, our traditions, our history, our music, our lingo, our food, all the stuff that makes up what a culture is. So, yeah, I guess I'll just hand it off from right there.
Okay, I appreciate that. Let me just mute you there. And just to address something that you said, like you said, I'm more than just being Black. I'm a whole bunch of different things, and I think the discussion between I guess you could say, the two sides of conservatives has a lot to do with what is the level of importance I'm putting on being Black. It sounds like a very short way of putting it, but I think some people are afraid of one side wants it to be this all-encompassing thing that I'm constantly bringing up, where I enter a conversation saying, as a Black man, and another side wants it to be something that, yeah, it's obvious I'm Black. Yes, all these other things I'm proud of, but it's not at the forefront of my constant thought and my constant being. I move about life, I go to work, I pay my bills just like everybody else. So I think that comes into play too, just to throw that out there. Kris, I'll let you answer the question. What is Black conservatism to you?
Yeah, so for me, just kind of being new to politics and addressing some of these issues over the past few years, I don't really think of Black conservatism any different than I would think of white conservatism. If conservatism is the key word in this conversation, then I think it should look the same for Black or white, whether it goes to what we want as liberty or freedom or family values, limited government, has been mentioned, school and religion. These things are going to look very similar as to, quote unquote, white conservatism as it is to Black conservatism. So I think I agree with what Barrington is trying to get at, that, this what does Black mean, or so to speak. But I don't have an issue with someone putting values on quote unquote Black culture and deriving those things musically or food or anything, or being self-owned and being able to regulate your businesses or anything like that. But I am very wary of one kind of placing their identity in that, and so hopefully that was helpful. But yeah, that's my thoughts.
Okay, I appreciate that, Kris. The only other planned question I really had, because I feel like there's a lot of misunderstandings between both sides. So I wanted to ask everybody, what is the biggest misunderstanding about your position that you feel other people have? So I'll start with Aja.
Can you skip me real quick? My dogs are barking.
No problem. We'll go to Barrington.
Oh man, great question. I think it's the misconception that a lot of my rhetoric is focused only on Black people or Blackness itself, because I think a lot of my tweets and a lot of the things I've written before in regards to race are often missed. And to me, it seems that anytime this conversation is had, the opposite side, whatever side that is, automatically gets on the defense, because in my mind, it proves my point right, that this idea or this centering of Blackness is so important when essentially it's not. And I mean this for any type of race in regards to how we are identified racially in America. And I think that the fact that we are identified by Black, by white in terms like these, that is outdated and it's archaic, and it is not doing us any favors in trying to move forward and building a more unified nation, in my opinion. I think that the longer, let me start by saying this. When in the 60s and before, in times of racial unrest and the time of state-sponsored racism, unity amongst the race made sense, right? Time moved on. We're now in 2021, going to 2022 in a few weeks. And yet and still, we're having the same discussion surrounding race that we had years ago, meaning that we continuously taking this approach that's not working. And so maybe in order to solve the problems that we're looking to solve, maybe we need to take another approach. Another aspect of it that has always baffled me is that, of course, like what is the, and I mean this when I ask this question, what is the interest, or is the vested interest, excuse me, does a person have in just seeing the people of their own race succeed? So, for example, I'll take it to when I created a policy or a platform or policy that was strictly for Black people, and I thought to myself, wow, this doesn't speak to, or what about the people who are in different races that are struggling as well? Why is it that I feel the necessity or feel the obligation to have to focus only on Black people when essentially there are people of other races that are doing worse than some Black people are? And that's not fair.
What happened?
Oh, we lost you.
Are you there?
Hello?
There you are.
We can hear you.
Did you guys not hear anything I said?
We did, and you got cut off.
Okay. Basically, the last thing I said was I think that going forward, we have to reassess our views and our entire relationship to race going forward within our nation if we expect to be on a unified front, because we're not progressing at all, and we're taking steps backward more so than forward. That's basically what I said.
Adam, are you there?
Adam?
Can you guys hear me?
There you are.
Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yes.
That was crazy. Yes. It just completely dropped out. Barrington, you went completely silent. I didn't hear anything anybody said for like the past 2 minutes. So I feel.
What?
Oh, shit.
It's the Russians. The Russians are messing things up. That's what's going on. It's either Russia or China. Take your pick.
China.
See, here we are. We're trying to unite. The white man's trying to stop us. That's what's going on.
I'd rather blame China.
All right. So if someone, I feel really bad, but can someone refresh me as far as like, what was the last thing that was stated?
Basically, can everybody hear me? Give me an emoji if you can hear me, because I'm looking at my screen now. Okay, I saw you, Asia. Jeff, can you hear me? Kris, I see you. All right. Adam, basically what I said to sum everything up, I said that your question was what part of our rhetoric gets most misunderstood by the other side. And I feel that the part of my rhetoric that it gets misunderstood by the other side is that I'm focusing more so on Blackness or Black people, when essentially my rhetoric deals with all race. And ultimately, I feel that going forward, we need to reassess and readvise how we are looking at race in our country, because in my mind, or my opinion rather, we are going backwards more so than forward. I stated that a sense of racial unity made sense in the times of civil rights, and the time where state-sponsored racism, was occurring on a very like constant basis. However, we move forward out of that, and now going to 2022, it's time to now do something different if we're seeking to have the outcomes that we're looking for.
Okay. Just to play a little bit of devil's advocate, is it at all possible that it's not necessarily, not saying that it's not an issue, but just play devil's advocate, it's not necessarily that we as Black people were trying to unite, and that's why things aren't succeeding in certain communities? Could it be that there are other things that are in play? Like Jeff has mentioned, the role of government has come into play. How we address family, religion, all these other things. Not trying to give like a particular source, but is it possible that coming together as a collective, let's say in a particular community, so you're in Atlanta, if for people in Atlanta were to come together and they say, us as Black people, we need to do for ourselves, come together, rebuild our community. And the uniting factor is that they're of the same culture or the same ethnicity, however you want to call it. But the end result are positive results. Is that a bad thing?
Of course not. I would never say anything that amounts to any positivity is a bad thing, but I think we're not being honest about the fact that we just aren't a collective. And I say this because when you look at the different groupings of socioeconomics among Black people, you will see there are different cultural identities. And with that being stated, there are certain cultural identities that some people have that are progressive. There are some cultural identities that some Blacks have that are regressive. And I think that we don't do enough or have the conversation around this truth enough. But instead, because of the quote unquote Black ideology, we often lump ourselves as one big group. And I feel like we're legitimately the only demographic that does this. And the only demographic that the media does this to, as well as political parties does this to as well.
Okay. I'm gonna go to Jeff. I'm assuming Jeff didn't answer the question before, but Jeff, what is the biggest misconception about your position?
I would say, okay, I'll go with the bad faith misconceptions first and then the good faith misconceptions. The bad faith misconceptions is that people like myself are segregationists, or that we're on the hard left, or that we're all about skin color and not about culture. Most of those criticisms are not made in good faith, because I've explained that over and over again. A lot of us have, and people will still say it. But the good faith misconceptions, and the ones that I can work with, are mainly just the people who don't understand a lot of what we're talking about. Like I had a lot of people saying, well, what is Black culture? I don't know what that is. Now, some people were saying that to challenge me. Others were saying that because they really don't know. So I think that they think that, well, there isn't really such thing as Black culture, or that if you mention Black culture, you're talking about the collective, like Barrington was talking about. And I think that one of the misconceptions is that there is no Black culture because a lot of Black people are different. But I mean, but if you use that logic, then there's no American culture either. Because I can tell you right now, I'm originally from Southern California, and I've been in Texas for 10 years. The cultures between those two states, very different. So, but we're all still American, right? I mean, there are certain things that we still have in common. We still have a shared history. There's still a lot of things in common that we do. So I would say the same thing applies to Black culture. And I think one of the other misconceptions is that if you talk about these things, then that means you're giving in to the left, or you're pandering to the left, or you're being like the left. And what I would say is, like, look, if you acknowledge Black culture, you're not going to turn into Al Sharpton. I guarantee you. I do it all the time, and my hair has never gone into that perm. I've never become a grifter. You can talk about Black culture. You can even talk about issues that impact the Black community disproportionately. Whatever the reasons are, whether you think it's 100% because Black people are the problem, or 100% it's all racism, you can still talk about those things without being the left. And I think that is the crux of the problem. I think we are just so used to reacting to what the left does that anything that even sounds like it, we just automatically go to the opposite extreme because we think that we're talking about, Shaun King and Ibram X. Kendi. No. I look at conservatives to be able to talk about these things in a nuanced way because, honestly, we know that the progressives don't care. They don't care about being honest about this stuff. They have an agenda. All they want to do is ensure that too many Black Americans remain in the position that they're in. I think that conservatives are the ones who can be the adults in the room and actually have honest conversations about these. But we can't do it if we're just going 100% the opposite of what the left is saying, or going so far as to deny that Black culture exists just because. I don't, strategically, it's a silly move. So I would say that that's kind of where I'm coming from. I think that a lot of it is just reassuring people like, hey, we can talk about these things. It doesn't mean that we're race baiters. It doesn't mean that you're going to turn into a race baiter. There's a complete difference between myself and, I don't know, Ta-Nehisi Coates. Nobody could ever say that we line up on our ideology. There may be points of agreement. I have points of agreement with almost everybody, and I have points of disagreement with everybody. But it's not the same thing. And I think that delineation needs to be made clear.
Okay, understood. Kris, what's the biggest misconception about your position?
I kind of see two issues that I would see as misconceptions if I'm epistemically aware of, the pushback that I receive a lot. But one is either that I'm anti-black, I'm always, or from the pushback, you're always just seeing problems in the black community, or, then you get the kind of insult that comes with that coon, Uncle Tom, all that, you're a puppet for the white man. Another issue I kind of see is that, that I'm accused of is I don't see racism anywhere, and I've been very clear that racism still exists. I don't believe that racism is completely 100% over with, and so those are kind of some of the I think misconceptions of me if I'm aware of those issues. So that's what I would argue.
All right, thank you, Kris. And actually, just to kind of jump in what Kris said, in my book, I talk about certain cultural issues within what I see as Black culture. And I think Kris is right. There's also this reflex, like how Jeff was saying, there's a reflex when we talk about Black people specifically to automatically think that they're on the left or they're trying to sound like the left. There's also this reflex when we too talk about legit issues that are not necessarily inflicted by somebody else. These are very conscious decisions that are made by people within our own race, our own culture, that we're saying, well, you're only saying this because of someone else, or you're only saying this because you hate yourself, you hate being Black. You're always being critical of Black people. And for me, I think if Black people prosper, that's actually a selfish act for me because that benefits me. If the image of Black people improves, that's better for me as well. So I get no benefit by saying Black people are terrible, I hate being Black. That doesn't benefit me at all, and it doesn't benefit anybody. It's a completely negative way of looking at things. But in order to have a strong, healthy culture, you have to be allowed to criticize things that are obviously negative and talk about really harsh things that have no involvement or very little involvement from other people. So, within my book, I talk about single parents and I talk about family planning and how important it is. But in order to do that, we got to be able to talk about the fathers and the mothers, right? We can call men deadbeat dads every day, but we have to be able to talk about the women who are choosing to put themselves in very particular positions, not the children of divorce or anything like that. But I'm talking about people who are having children, including myself. I have a son who's out of wedlock, right? And I know the danger that I put my son in by having him out of wedlock. What the statistics show for children like myself who grew up without his father. I know all these different things. And I think it's very important that we have to criticize all aspects of the particular culture. And within Black culture, we have to say that there is a baby mama culture that exists. This does not mean that every woman is a baby mama or anything like that. It just exists within it. And we have to be able to have these particular discussions without saying that women are bad, all women are this, all Black women are this, or that we're trying to shame Black women. There's certain aspects within Black culture that exist that are negative. On the flip side, there are certain things about American Black culture that are awesome, that are amazing. I talk to people from other countries where they're like, when I think of America, I think of so many different Black people that for them, it's weird that we see ourselves as Black Americans, they see us as American, right? And that's just their viewpoint. But there's so many things that we've contributed throughout this country since the very beginning. And I think we have to have a balanced way of having a discussion about Black culture and Black people, behavioral patterns, and all these different things. So, that's just my 2 cents or 3 cents. I just talked to you a little bit, but
can I chime real quick on that, on what you said?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that what you just said right there is a great example of how we need to be talking about these things. Like you didn't just talk about the things we're doing wrong. You talked about the things that we've done right throughout history. And here's my thing. I think we need to talk about the bad aspects of the Black community or Black culture or whatever you want to call it. We have to talk about the out of wedlock rate. We got to talk about gang violence. We got to talk about, financial illiteracy or what have you. My only issue is when people only want to talk about that, and they're basically just talking about that just for the sake of talking about that. I'm not saying anybody here is doing that. I'm just saying in general what I've seen. So to me, it's like there's that conversation leads nowhere. We know, again, like I said, we know the left is not going to have a serious conversation on these things, but we're not either, because all we want to do is just say, oh, out of wedlock rate, and then that's it. That's it. That's all. One of the things that I want to start doing with my spaces is I want to actually host conversations talking about the negative aspects of the Black community, but actually have conversations with solutions in mind. That's what's missing. And to me, so that's why to me, it does come off like a lot of people just want to bash the Black community because they're not really trying to help. They're not offering anything helpful. Like Adam, you even hosting this right now is part of the solution. So we need to have more of these conversations, but I just want them to be honest. And I want them to be solutions oriented. I don't want it just to be going up in front of white conservatives and telling white people how bad Black people are, because that's deceptive and it's destructive. It doesn't move us forward. It just, it can help you get some clicks. It can help you get some money, but that's about it. So that's my only gripe. But I think that we do need to talk about these things in depth in a way that the left refuses to, and in the way that a lot of people on the right refuse to. That's it.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I agree with you. I think we're in a complete agreement that there is a way to have these particular conversations, to have it in a nuanced fashion, without saying black people in general are terrible or anything like that. And I understand where you're coming from. There are certain people that it seems like all they're talking about are the negative aspects. What I will say is this: it is human nature to notice the negative and ignore the positives, right? And there are people that I know of, and I'm not saying they're here, but there are people that I know of that do exactly what Jeff does. Jeff was stating, that speak about the negative 95% of the time. There are people, though, I will say, that speak about both the negatives and the positives. And sometimes we ignore that, the positive aspect of those particular people, and they get lumped in with the people who primarily say negative things. So, I try to purposely, even within the book, I talk about issues, but I literally have 9 chapters at the end of my book talking about possible solutions, right? Because I didn't want to be one of those people who just complains that Black people are this and this and that, and without talking about what we could possibly do to improve things. I'll go to Barrington. Barrington, you put your hand up.
Yeah, I'm going to be brief because I'm a gentleman. I want AJ to say her point. She hasn't spoken in a long time, right? All right, so I agree with Jeff in regards to offering solutions, but I think that what we're missing out on this entire conversation is that the issues that we see in the quote unquote Black community is not a Black community thing. There's a certain sect of Black people within the Black community that has these issues. And so I'm saying this because right now, more so than ever, you will see that a lot of these issues that were once exclusively within the Black community have permeated throughout American culture, and now it's an American problem in itself. And I think that is the larger conversation to have in the first place. And so it goes back to me asking, what is the vested interest that we have? Everybody up here can answer this question, but it's to everyone in this room. What is the vested interest that we have in seeing just Black people succeed when essentially that same sentiment should be shared for all Americans? Don't you guys think? Again, I totally agree with the notion that anytime we discuss problems, solutions need to be discussed right after. But I feel like in looking in understanding politics and understanding how these conversations come about and understanding what is said within these conversations, we have a tendency to again speak about the entire collective when it's only a portion of the collective, and that we should really be more specific and more succinct within our verbiage, within our rhetoric. That way we could open up, or I would say more so, we could be open-minded in understanding what exactly we're trying to talk about in that regard. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think I understand what you're trying to say. Aja, I'm so sorry. Aja, go ahead.
That's okay. I mean, everybody had a great valid point, but I look at it too as a historical and political, because I've been in politics and I ran for Congress so many times. So when you're talking about the negative, you also have to look at the historical background with the negative, with Jim Crow, with redlining, with the 13th Amendment loophole, and why we, the negative is the negative. And then if you want to go further back and further study with political and historical, if nobody's ever read Willie Lynch, that was the part of the problem right there, was this separation between the house Negro and the field Negro. It was the light skin versus the dark skin. It was the man versus the woman. And that's the bottom, actually the root cause for my own understanding. And that's just my belief, the root cause of why we are constantly at each other's throats. And then they separate us from Democrat to Republican, or to wealthy and versus poor. And you go back to the root cause of, the negative, but you have to finally trace back, how do we get to where we are as we came here, or our ancestors came here? They were captured, they were enslaved, and they worked together, but they saw that pivoting us together, not by skin tone, but also by gender. So when we talk about, like I said, I come from a single parent home. I mean, I know my dad. My dad's passed away, actually. But learning about the division and how we're constantly divided and pivoted against each other. And this happens on both sides. My Democrat friends, they tell me the same thing. This happens on their side too. And so they're getting tired of it as well, because they said, okay, what is the positive solution for us to move forward as a group, as a community, as an individual? You look at it too when it comes to how wealth is being distributed. You look at it too at historical points of view of blocking of how to get loans from the banks. You look at it too and how to get any type of you know for a long time, we weren't admitted to different colleges and universities. So we created our own colleges and universities. We weren't even allowed to join the white fraternal organization. So we created our own Black fraternal and sorority organizations. So there's a lot to it, as where we turn the negative into a positive. But when we're trying to turn that negative to a positive now, we are being called separatists. But if you're not looking at historical history of why we did those things, because we weren't allowed to, so we created our own space. It wasn't that we were trying to get away from being American. I mean, my grandfather served in 3 wars. He was Army Air Corps. And he was in the Air Force for 33 years, Chief Master Sergeant. He had to endure a lot of racism. I mean, even joining the military, it was a lot going on where we were segregated, then we finally got desegregated. And we were giving lower positions. I mean, and now we're back to square one again, like we just got off the plantation, just got our 1964 rights yesterday, and we're trying to do something positive to turn these negatives into positives, but we're also being beaten down by people who are saying, well, you're trying to be separatists. No, we've done this for a very long time. You complain about we don't have wealth. Okay, let me start wealth. Let's get together. Adam, me, Jeff, Barron, Kris, and other people on here. Let's pull our money together and let's create wealth so we can show, no, we're doing something positive. I don't know if he's still in here, King Randall. I mean, to me, that's a very, very smart man who said, I'm going to make change in my own community and help a lot of young Black men, a lot of young Black boys, to start teaching them how to read, to start teaching them how to do trade skills. And he gets beat down from both sides with that. Oh, what about the white kids? What about these kids? No, you're complaining about young Black men in America, and you love to use the violence for your own ratings and to raise money. But here he is, he's trying to get them to be self-efficient, to try to show that, to groom them to be great role models. So this isn't new for us. And I respect everybody's position, and I learned a lot too. But at the same time, if we're going to move forward, stop trying to deny or try to create this utopia that if we're going to do this, we've done it before in history. We've created our own colleges, the HBCUs. We have our We have a lot of things that we've done, and then it seems to me that we get knocked back down again and back to square one. How about leave us alone? Let us do what we feel that's good in our communities and even the communities that we live in. If you don't want to identify with the subtitle of Black or whatever you have in front of you, that's fine. But those of us who have a passion and caring to show the world that, wow, Aj is doing this in her area, Jeff is doing this in his area, Adam and Kris, you guys are doing that in your area. It's not being separatist. It's that for so long after slavery, we had to really be self-efficient and try to work together as a community and to build so we can survive, so we can live, and so we can, even though we had to deal with Jim Crow and the Black codes and everything else, but we also flourished. We Our Black wealth was taken from us, or was take well, not us in particular, but our ancestors, our descendants. So when we try to build that up again, we're always being constantly told, well, you're separating yourself. No, we're not separating ourselves. We are trying to build wealth. We're trying to relive or try to live the American dream like everybody else that comes here. And we're trying to show the world that we can work together, but I'm not aiming this at anybody, you quote unquote are the ones that really want to make us separate and to keep us down. From a political aspect, you're using these talking points to paint a picture from people who just came here to America and hear all these negative things about Black Americans. Trust me, I have immigrant friends who say, wow, before we came here, we heard Black Americans kill each other every single day and a bunch of drug addicts and prostitutes. And they come to find out, wow, we didn't know that you guys invented this and that and been professors and all this great history because of the negative stereotypes that are constantly being pushed on both sides, not just the left, but both sides, even on the right, and I'm on the right, that they say, wow, no, Black America is cool. You guys have a great culture. I'm Creole. My other culture is Creole. We have our own language, our own flag, our own culture down there in Nolans or NOLA or New Orleans, if you want me to be proper. So even that has a subculture. Do you want me to deny that? No, we want to embrace it. We want people to learn, especially those who live around the world, that we offer so much and contributed so much, and the negatives do need to stop, but we also need to start talking about these negatives amongst ourselves without having political arguments, but how we can work together. We can agree to disagree, but we all have something in common to build together and to say, hey, we're going to make this work. But at the same time, those people who keep pushing this horrible narrative about us, it makes us look like you're actually alienating us from being American, from just being Black or just being male and female. You're making us feel as if we're some type of subhuman again. So you're contributing to the same talking points that we've heard from years and how we were even categorized. So being to really stop this or to really move forward and try to come together, yes, we do need to start talking about the issues in the inner cities, but at the same time, we have to look at it as a political issue as well, because those representatives are not also solving those issues where, you still do have bits and pieces of policy that do hold us back. You still have the issues of trying to come together as one, regardless of political ideology, but you're still trying to throw what my grandma used to say, a monkey wrench, or just stir the shit pot, excuse my language, but that's how my grandma rolled, to keep us going 10 steps backwards, and we're just trying to put one step forward. So when it comes to the misconception that all Black conservatives are one way, no, we do think differently. But I always tell people there's the famed ones. I'm not going to mention no names. And then we have the ones who are trying to create solutions to help us, to build us, so we can start creating legacies and new legacies for the new generation of upcoming Black Americans.
Okay. Man, you gave us a lot right there. And I think the greater point you're trying to make is that you want to find solutions. Like you mentioned, King Randall, he's trying to find a particular solution. And it's funny that you mentioned him, because the first time I heard about him was when Roland Martin was trying to lambaste him for trying to do something positive within his own community. And that right there showed me how much one person can sort of make some sort of change in a very impactful way. Even if he just has a limited amount of kids that he's helping, who knows how much of an impact that could be, because those kids can grow up and help other people, and it can replicate from there. I think that there is a lot that we have in common between the two sides. If you want to say there's two sides, I think there's a lot of things that we have in common that we want. We want to find some sort of solution as far as moving forward with using conservative values, conservative principles. And if you want to say Black identity is important, then so be it. If you want to say it's not important, then so be it. But if the end result is that Black people get some sort of benefit at the end, then so be it as well. I mean, I think there's more than one way to go about this. And I think between the two sides, there's a lot that we share in common that we can actually put together and try to move forward with. And that actually brings me to my next question. What do we have in common? Because we talk about the differences and how we view things and how we want to approach things, but what do we have in common? I think we lost Jeff. I'll look out for Jeff, but I'll ask Kris. Kris, what are the two sides? What do we have in common that we could actually use as some sort of solution?
Man, that's a really good question. I'll start off just from this perspective. I think both sides generally have a love and concern for Black people. I know I do, because I know I mentioned, like, in the Misconception, oftentimes it's viewed as anti-Black or hate, but I think both sides generally care about the Black community, and I think that's good. To start off with a recognition of that both sides do care, and I think conversations like this are needed. Sitting down with people who because I think we're generally close, like, as far as our ideology concerning maybe framing things a little different, but like even sitting down with people, I think, are helpful, because oftentimes I've talked to people who are willing to talk, and they may consider themselves woke. And a lot of times I'm like, you're saying the exact same thing I'm saying. I wouldn't even label you as quote unquote woke. So I think oftentimes we're closer than what appears to be, despite these labels maybe that comes with us or we attach ourselves to. But I think love for the community is very needed. So I don't have any elaborate things to add to that, besides, like, I think starting off, the motivation has to be right. So yeah.
All right. Jeff, you back with us?
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I don't know. Again, I think that was China again. I don't know if that was Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin, but I'm back now.
Ukraine.
There you go. Jeff, I was asking the question. I was basically making a statement that we have a lot in common. And I want to hear from your perspective, what are those things that we do have in common that we could use to move forward together?
Are you talking about among Black conservatives or among Black people in general?
Yes.
Or
Black conservatives.
I think when it comes to like policy and stuff like that, I'm sure we agree on like 90%, 80, 90%. I think that the difference has always been in terms of strategy. And when I talk about strategy, I mean messaging strategy. One of the issues that I had with a lot of the issues that I was talking about, where we're just always harping on the negative parts of the Black community, that turns people off. And honestly, that strategy has been used by the right, by conservatives, by Republicans, by conservative media. That messaging strategy has been used for 60 years and even more. it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked up until this point, and it's never going to work. So the way we move forward is to try to formulate.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Jeff went
I
out.
can, yeah, I can hear you.
All right, as long as it wasn't me this time. All right, when Jeff, oh, hold on, I think he's back.
Yeah.
Jeff, you back with us?
I'm back with you. I don't know what's going on here, but just to finish out what I was saying, I think that the key is to recognize that the way we've been doing it up until this point hasn't been working. It's never going to work. It's never going to magically happen. We all know the definition of insanity. So we need to get together and figure out a different way to message, one that doesn't turn off Black voters, Black Democrats. Because even when I talk to Black Democrats, like I think, Kris, you were just saying, you talk about how we're all saying the same thing. Guess what? A lot of Black Democrats say a lot of what we say too. I mean, I just had a conversation with a lady who identifies as like a moderate Democrat, and we agreed probably on more than we disagreed. I mean, I'm sure maybe on some social programs we might disagree, but in general, we agree on a lot of these things. So I think if we're going to reach people from the other side, we have to change the way we talk about Black people, and we have to change the way that we speak with Black people. We need to stop. First off, we need to move from talking about Black people and move towards talking to Black people and actually having these conversations. Yeah, I think a lot of that is missing. It's not all our fault. I mean, because we got people on the left who want us divided too, right? But I think that if we're going to turn the right into something that looks attractive to the Black community, we have to just revamp our messaging style. We have to revamp our talking points. We have to revamp the way we speak about these issues. And we have to speak about them in a way that is honest. And again, without turning into Al Sharpton. Conservatives are the only ones who can do that. If you're on the left, you got to sound like Al Sharpton. I'm sorry, you do. But on our side, we don't. So we don't have to pretend. We don't have to only talk about what we're doing wrong. It's okay to even talk about what has happened in history that has contributed to the plight of a lot of Black Americans. It's okay to acknowledge that racism has played an impact.
The Russians must really not want Jeff to finish what he's saying.
It's a
Keeps mentioning them.
conspiracy theory.
You keep mentioning them.
Yeah, I better stop because it knocked me off too.
Jesus. It's like Twitter saw Black conservatives were trying to get together, and they said, let's mess them up a little bit.
The man is holding us
if you
down.
notice, I'm the only one who hasn't been kicked off. So.
Oh man. I think Jeff is back. Is he back?
I don't see the thing.
I don't think he's back. We'll go to, while Jeff is working his way back, Barrington. What are the things that we do have in common that we could use to work together to move forward?
I think that we are all on this journey to righteousness, and what I mean by that is I feel like we all have a destination that we're trying to get to. We just have different routes into getting there. So imagine if it's like us almost starting at the same point or the same state, and we're trying to get to California, and it's 4 of us, 5 now since Jeff's back. We all have different routes, and we all choose our different routes to get there, but yet we still have the same end game destination. And I think that we just have to figure out the best way to move forward that's going to be beneficial, not to us, but just to the people that we're trying to reach and we're trying to connect to. Like, I think that when we talk about, again, negative aspects of the quote unquote Black community, I think that you can honestly make an argument that this is an issue for people who are mainly possess impoverished mentality or a culture of poverty. And when I'm saying that, it's because when you actually look at a breakdown of social economics of different races and different groups, what you'll start to see is in certain tax brackets, certain people have certain habits, and in lower tax brackets, other people have other habits. And these conditions create the behaviors and what's that? Just the behaviors that we see that they partake in. And I think that if we can just break down the dynamics of all of the issues that we see and really see the crux of the issues, I think that we will be able to get to some type of middle ground in going forward, unified.
Well, my question is, what is that middle ground? Or do you have a proposal as far as what that middle ground is?
I think the middle. Okay, this is just a working theory I have for my own. I think that just the notion of getting people, not just Black people, but everyone away from thinking that the government or a specific political leader or a specific political party is going to be your savior. I think that we have everything that we need within our communities, as far as like fixing the issues that's within our reach. And I think that if people learn to trust themselves and trust other people who are like-minded and like-hearted as them, I think that we'll start to see a changing of the tide as far as our government and our political leaders won't be able to do the things or get away with the things that they get away with. So ultimately, I think that it starts at the very bottom. It starts with the individual, and then it starts with the individual connecting with like-minded people or like-hearted people, and then you just build up from there. But I think that like it's an issue in my mind when over 90% of the Black voter base votes one side. There's no parity there, which means that the Democrats really don't have to do anything for you because they already know they're going to get your vote. And then on the other side, the GOP is like, well, you're not going to vote for us anyway, so we're not going to pay attention to you. If you look throughout history, you'll see that a lot of smaller groups didn't really need political power to make ends and I would say make headway in as far as their place in America. They start working with it themselves, and then eventually they built the leverage to give themselves the leverage needed politically, however they saw fit. I think that we have to get back to basics in regards to that. We can't really look at like people to help us. We have to help ourselves, and I think that that's where the middle ground starts at.
Okay, Aja.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. I'm sorry. We were basically saying how there are a lot of things that we do have in common, and so what is like you said, like the middle ground where we can come together to find some sort of way to move forward, basically, between Black conservatives. Did we lose Asia? And Barrington, are you still there? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm here.
It's like everybody's just dropping.
If that helps.
Twitter does not want this conversation to happen.
Hey, they sure don't.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yep. Aja, can you hear us?
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
You can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. Maybe I'll just sit right here and not move my phone. What we can do, I mean, we do have a lot of in common and we do disagree. And I think if we stop with this utopian type of world that some of you, and I'm not knocking you, and I'm not trying to bash you for it, but on the conservative side, this type of conservative, utopian ideology, we need to focus on just building healthy institutions. We need to build within our own communities and to stop really capitalizing on if you're Black, if you're not Black. We all know who we are, just based on how we look at each other in the mirror, and to embrace the unique aspects and the traditions that we do have, and how we can use that to align with conservative values. Also, my main focus is Black economics, in policy. How can we build? And the messengers that are being put up there don't focus on that. They always complain about the negative, but we can come together and say, no, we're going to have a better message and go out to the communities that do need help and start talking about, hey, how about let's help you get real estate license, and let's teach you how to invest. Let's teach you about school choice, or how to be active in your local community to make positive changes. We have a message problem. And the problem with the right is that they put up the wrong messengers. But we can find something in common to say we are promoting a positive and good message, but without denying the history of the negative that we had to endure. Well, I say we, meaning our parents and our grandparents and our great grandparents, had to endure, but they still achieved success, even though they had to endure segregation and they had to endure racism and killing and lynching. We use that to remind and to how to build, and using the positives, actually using the negatives and turning them into positives, and how to engage in the community. I know I'm going to make fun of Jeff. He did a panel, I think it was this year or last year. It was about messaging. You have your Carltons and your Wills, and maybe Jeff can repost that. Is who you send out into the community to start talking about being excellent as an individual and as a community, and to rebuild the community. But we also have to learn and understand and to listen to the community that we're engaging in. We cannot say all communities fits all. No, I live in California. It's different where Jeff lives. It's different where everybody else lives. Everybody has a different sense of what they want to see in their community, but we have a common goal to make it better, and to make it better for the future generations. Instead of focusing on this, like I said, this utopian type of world, which to me, I don't like that, because it brings up history with Hitler and Mussolini and Russia, well, the USSR back then. Start looking at how we know we're Black. We know we're Black Americans. We know we're Black Democrats, Black Libertarians, or whatever, Black Conservative or Black Republicans. But we as a community and as a people, we have a lot in common when it comes to building economic wealth, building safe areas, having access to these institutions that denied for so long, to create a new institution, to start coming together when it comes to not also focusing on political identities. We can scrap that all together and just come at the table just as great people with like minds who have different ideas, and to start focusing on how we're going to expand, creating small businesses that turn into corporations. So main problem is the messaging. And I've seen it more on the right in the recent years than on the left. Of course, I know what the left is going to say is very predictable. It's like a psychic. You already know what they're going to say. But on the right, we need to start saying, okay, how about saying it this way instead of saying it in a harsh, negative way, where people think we're so negative on the right, where we're not. And to apply not only the conservative principles, but to push to make the Constitution equally apply to us as well. We're still struggling with that. To start going to the churches, to start teaching people and parents how to get active in their school boards. Those are the things that people want to hear. They don't want to hear, get off the plantation and we're trained monkeys. Yeah, I went down that road. I'm not going to mention names, but I went down that road. They want to hear, how can my kid get a better education? How can I get a better paying job? Or I want to build a business. That's what we need to focus on, is how we message, how we implement, and how we execute.
Okay, and And you know what? I really like what you said as far as the messaging aspect, because I actually agree with you when it comes to that. You mentioned the difference between Will and Carlton, right? The conserve nerds want to go around and say this percentage of Black people and this percentage of this and how this is. No one cares about that, or at least no one cares about it to the degree of having some sort of solution. And I've said before that I think one of the biggest problems on the right is that they don't use tactics that actually work. Part of the reason the left is able to gain so much Black support is because they do, to some degree, have a message of compassion, right? It may be of ultra compassion to be reliable off them and reliable off the government and not doing for self, but they have a message of compassion. And it doesn't matter if it's Black people or anybody. If people are emotional, and if you attack their emotions, as far as not attack, if you game their emotions, then people will listen to you. If you appear to actually care about the circumstance that is actually going on within their particular area, for the personally, whatever, then people will give you a shot. Recently, I've met other congressional candidates who've talked about how I'll mention Derek Mayfield. I met him in person the other day, and he talked about how he went into Trenton. No other Republican wanted to go into Trenton. He went into Trenton and he started talking to people. He said there was this one old lady who, as soon as she found out he was a Republican, she was like, "No, I'm not interested." Didn't want to take his card, but she stayed and listened to him speak. And he talked about the real issues that were happening for them and why they should be concerned about these issues. And she said, he said afterwards, she wanted to take his card. She's like, "You have my vote." And it's that particular thing, that actually getting out there and actually talking to people, but speaking people's languages. And I think the right has taken the Ben Shapiro aspect of facts don't care about your feelings, but at the same time, feelings don't really give a shit about your facts, right? You have to address people's feelings before you can supply some sort of statistics and all this particular thing. So you have to address people's real world emotions. You have to address people's actual problems. And throwing numbers at people or using the same rhetorical statements over and over and over, and not following up with that. Like, for example, the single parent households. I think that's a huge issue. But I purposely wrote my book in a way that I say why it's an issue, right? And I don't use it as a jab or as a stabbing point to chastise Black people. I say it from a very compassionate standpoint as a child of a single parent household. And here's why we need to be mindful of it. It's not to attack anybody. It's to be very compassionate, which is why people who've actually read it understand what I'm trying to do, understand what I'm trying to say. And I think you're right, Asha. The messaging aspect from the right in regards to attracting more Black people onto the side has been terrible. And it doesn't help that the right doesn't really have a great media institution, right? We already know the major networks, the vast majority of them are on the left. So they already have like they're already working from behind from that standpoint. But I think that ultimately when Black people do hear people on the right, the message is absolutely horrible to get them to understand where they're trying to come from, unless they just happen to be a very analytical person and they understand these particular facts and they just run with it. So ultimately what I'm saying is I agree with you on a long-winded way. Does anybody want to comment as far as what I said?
Yeah, I agree with it. I mean, I'm trying a new device here, so hopefully you don't kick me off again. But I agree. I mean, and that's what I was trying to say before. I mean, we have to change the way that we're getting our message across. I mean, when we're talking about these issues, we should be talking from a place of compassion and not a place of finger wagging or a place of just saying what we know or what we think our audience wants to hear. And honestly, I think it'll take time. I mean, because even if we do change the way we message, it's going to take a long time to earn that trust back. I mean, if you know the history, then you know why Black people started going more towards Democrats because Republicans basically abandoned that relationship. So I think it's important to remember that we're not here looking for the short term. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So yes, we do need to change the way we're doing things right now. And we also need to recognize it's going to take a while. I think we'll have some wins here and there too, though. If you look at Jalen Johnson, he won city commissioner in Albany, Georgia. He didn't do that by going into those neighborhoods talking about, oh, you guys have been voting Democrats. You're on a plantation. What the hell's wrong with you? You must not be all that bright. You're mentally enslaved, yada, yada, yada. No, he just went and had conversations. He said, look, this is how our government is working here at the city level. Here's how it's affecting you. Here's what I believe. I believe in limited government. I think that the government should not be intrusive into your life. All the conservative principles. He didn't identify as Republican, but he identified as nonpartisan, but everything he said was conservative, and people were agreeing with him. So to me, this can be done. There have been Republicans who have won a sizable amount of Black votes. Jalen Johnson ran in an area that was 70% Black. I always bring up Governor Mike Huckabee. He won almost half the Black vote when he ran for governor. He didn't do that by talking about plantations. He didn't do that about talking down. He didn't do that by talking down to the Black community. He talked to Black people the same way he talked to white people. I think, and people think, oh, it has to be different. Well, no, it's not that different. Just talk to him like you would a normal person. Like, it doesn't have to be all that crazy. So I think that if we are able to do that, they're going to realize that, okay, maybe this is a new Republican Party. Democrats haven't been doing shit. Black people will tell you that. And most Black people aren't progressive. So, as much as I talk about Black progressives, I don't think we really have to worry about them that much because they're not winning any inroads in the Black community or in the Hispanic community. They don't want anything to do with them because Black people are not far left progressives. So there is an opportunity here, and we would be stupid not to take it. So last thing I'll say, I'll just reiterate. We got to change the way we're messaging. We got to change the way we're approaching this. We have to be willing to talk to people face to face instead of from far away. All right, don't talk about Chicago unless you want to actually talk about solutions for Chicago. All right, that's it.
Ajay, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I keep getting cut off. No, and thank you, Adam, for appreciating my comment. And then Jeff hit the nail on the head. Like I said, I'm involved in my party. When I first started running, I got involved within the local party, the central committee, and I started to hear and how they viewed not only the Black community, but just the minority community as a whole, because of what they see on TV. It's getting out there, and especially when you're a Black conservative, I don't care if you're one spectrum or another spectrum, you need to start going to the local GOP meetings. You need to get involved with the local party to say, hey, I want to make a difference, and I think this way of doing things, because if you're just focusing on national, we're never going to win. We're never going to make a dent in trying to gain people over or to embrace what the ideology is or what the party is about. But we've forgotten that there's a local level government, that's where your heart and core of voters, and that's where the real people live that really just want to hear, hey, how are you going to make me have a better job or have a safe place community? And that's what we need to focus on, not this utopian viewpoint. But people really, like you said, Adam, people are getting tired of hearing statistics. I know I did for a long time, for about 15 years, about percentage rates. How are we going to fix the problem? And a lot of your average of people, they don't really want to hear numbers. They want to see results. And if we're not producing results, then they're not going to vote, or they're going to sit out on elections. They're not going to get engaged. Yes, we could shoot numbers all day, but at the end of the day, was it even effective? Those numbers are actually very outdated. And people now just want to hear, how are you going to help me? And it's to listen and to really listen to each other, even when we're going into communities that are heavy blue. People don't want to hear rhetoric. They want to hear, how are you going to help me pay my rent, help me with my childcare, help me with the blight around my area. And that's what they want to hear. And that's what I did when I ran the first time and the second time. I actually went out and I had a friend who was vice president of the local NAACP, and he was a Republican. I got to speak there, and everybody was like, wow, are you sure you're a Republican? I said, yes, I am a Republican. I'm one of those people that I'm not the mainstream Republican. And I also talked to the local BLM. I presented my ideas and my solutions. And of course, I had to hear about, the former president, but they said, you know what, we like you. We're going to give you a chance, because I had a normal conversation with people. And that's where our own party is really lacking, is having normal conversations with the everyday average American that just wants help and they want to have a voice. And if we start doing that at our own respective local levels and work our way up instead of automatically going to mainstream, we will see a positive change, and especially for us as Black Americans.
Okay. I know there's people who want to speak. I don't want this to go too late. I know we all probably got to work tomorrow. But I'll try and take a couple of people who want to add their 2 cents. My only request is, try to keep it straight to the point as to what you want to state, so we can get as many people as possible before it runs too late, and then we'll respond to it. So I'll take Squats and Shells. You can unmute yourself.
Oh, cool. Hey. All right. So I had some notes here I've been taking and sort of correlating here. So I really wanted to talk when Barrington was still in the room, because I think part of the problem with the idea that we all just want, America to succeed is that there's no real problem, and it's not in conflict with sort of looking at the success of Black people. The problem is when you have issues, you have to sort of look at the source and find a solution for those issues. So here's a perfect example. Earlier, someone, and I think it was you, you mentioned that you talked about single parent households and how it's a bad thing, or how it's a problematic thing. And that's great, and I agree. The problem I see is, like, when we talk about these things, we talk about these issues as if they just sort of sprung up in the 60s. If you look at there's a report called the Moynihan Report, right? It was done in the 1960s, and it was based on data that came from the 1920s. And if you look at those problems that they called out, you'll see the same problems that we have today. You'll see urban blight, urban poverty, you'll see broken families, and even high rates of intra-racial violence. So I think the problem we have with trying to solve these problems is we never really look at how deep the problems go. And at one point, I was a pretty staunch Republican, and I still am a Republican, but I was a pretty staunch conservative. One of the things that sort of changed my mind about conservatism was, one, I started to really read philosophy. I read Edmund Burke. I really actually sat down and read Milton Friedman. I read, The Conscience of a Conservative and things like that. And then I thought to myself, these things are being written at the same time and during the same context as Malcolm X was popular, and we were having Black empowerment movements and Black power movements. So, and I'm connecting to a point earlier that someone said that, conservatism is about universal or fundamental principles. And that's just not true. Conservatism actually came as a response to something that's called the divine right of kings that sort of sprung up due to the French Revolution. Now, a lot of that sounds like nonsense, and it doesn't really have anything to do with today. But the point I'm making is that conservatism, as we know it, came from a particular institutional problem that had to be solved. And it was solved in a particular culture. So And if it sounds like I'm out of breath, it's because I just got off the treadmill and I didn't expect you to unmute me, so I apologize. So the point I'm making is when you're trying to build a Black conservatism, I think the first thing you need to do is start thinking about who you were reading, what the principles are. There was something about, someone said about epistemology, and I think that's a great place to start. But there's a phrase, and I know this might be kind of a slur word in here, but there's a phrase in feminist theory called standpoint epistemology. And what that means is that there are particular kinds of truths that people will only see from a particular perspective because of their lived experience. And I think that's like an excellent point to think about for Black conservatives. Because when I think about Black conservatives, I don't think about Edmund Burke. I don't think about Milton Friedman or Eliot or even like John Dewey or people like that. I think about Martin Delany. I think about Malcolm X. I think about even to some extent Martin Luther King and Booker T. Washington, even W.E.B. Du Bois. And I know that a lot of conservatives try to paint him and Washington as like two sides of the two different parts of the spectrum, but they really weren't. I think about people like that. So in order to first deal with what conservatism or Black conservatism must be, you have to think about the principles that you're trying to conserve, the institutions you're trying to conserve. You have to think about what you really want to have. And I think for me as a Republican, a lot of the times we're dealing with a lot of things. We're dealing with the fact that there are people in the Republican Party who think that the party would be better off and better served, not by going after our vote, not by looking at our interests as things worthwhile to solve, because they're worried about losing their own basis problem or own base and hold over the base, and which is, and it happens. And I'm saying this as a person who's been to Central Committee, like Asia said. I'm saying this as a person who's been a part of those meetings that we don't really want to talk about on local GOP levels. Like, they don't want to necessarily reach out to us in a particular way because they know there's a risk. And the risk is they lose, quite frankly, parts of the white working class. So I think that's one problem. The second problem is that we can't just say we need to change a message. It's not just the message. When the Reconstruction happened and the Reconstruction failed, it failed because there was something called the Compromise of 1877, which was an agreement between Republicans and Democrats, ultimately resulting in Republicans pulling out of the South. And that sort of began a reign of racial terror on Black people. It's not just the message. We actually have to really evaluate the policies that we want to push forward to solve Black people's problem or to help ameliorate the issues that Black people have as much as we can as a society and sort of deal with things on that level. Because ultimately, public policy is not individualism. And I hate that phrase because, again, individualism is a particular cultural product. It is not a Black cultural product. It's a European cultural product. And I'm not here to say we can't borrow from European philosophers. But individualism is a philosophical thing. And it comes from a particular place and it was for a particular reason. What Black people need is not individualism. What Black people need is actually a healthy collectivism. Because ultimately what happens is we get caught up in these individualist problems. We get caught up in these things that, well, some of us are getting ahead and some of us are doing well. So we start pointing at other people and saying, why aren't you doing well? Why aren't you doing great? We say, oh, well, that problem is because of ghetto culture or Black culture or the negative aspects of Black culture. When the reality is we need to sort of rebuild our institutions, and ultimately we need to reevaluate the philosophical underpinnings of those solutions and not, or of those institutions. And that's not something we can do in, public party politics. But what we can do is sort of evaluate the kind of public policy we really want to push, get serious about those things, and go forward with those things. And what Barrington said about, and I'll close quick. What Barrington said about all Americans succeeding, I 100% agree. If you start really looking at class-based issues, a lot of the problems that Black people had and are having are class problems. If you want to put it a different way, our overrepresentation in the working class and the poor does create a set of problems where we could sort of have an overlap between other working class and poor groups, poor whites, poor Hispanics, even poor Asians, so on and so forth. So there are public policies that we can put in place and support that will support a broad spectrum of people. But there are also things we have to do to sort of that are going to be specific for Black people. We mentioned Black on Black crime. Black men, and I am myself a young Black man, are overrepresented in intraracial violence. That's not something we can solve by saying, pull up your bootstraps. And we have to actually sort of look at these things. So I encourage, and I'll close really quick, sorry. I encourage all Black conservatives to really sit down, take a moment, take a deep breath, and throw all those books that you get from white conservatives and think tanks and the Hoover Institution and Cato, throw those away just for a moment. Start looking at some of the conversations that Black philosophers were having inside of the diaspora. Like, start looking at your Amos Wilsons, looking at his evaluation on Black violence. Start considering what the public policy things that you want to put forward that your constituents would, or your potential constituents would support, and ultimately that the party would support in order to help Black people. Because ultimately, like, I think we're at a crossing road. If you looked at the sort of demographic data, Hispanics and Asians are moving right. So there's an opportunity that the GOP, if they follow Jim Banks, his letter, they could become a working class sort of populist party. But they could also sort of ignore some of the nastier problems that would be hard to disentangle in the Black community and go harder for Hispanics and for Asians. So I guess as Black conservatives, as Black Republicans, I think you need to make sure you get your foot in the door, get yourself on Central Committee, start having those conversations. The Central Committee is powerful because they can choose who gets the nomination. And if you know anything about local politics, usually the person who gets the nomination is the person that wins. It doesn't happen all the time, but most times it does. So start thinking about things that way. And I'll close there.
Okay. Does anybody want to make a comment? I know he said a lot.
Yeah, there was a lot there. So too much for me to respond to. But I mean, there was one part where he was talking about, figuring out what policies, actually taking a look at what conservative policies we can use to actually help the situation. One of the things that I always criticize on the right is that we are very good at criticizing the left, and it's almost all we do. And they deserve to be criticized. But criticism without bringing our own solution is not going to work long term. That's a short-term solution. Like, for instance, Republicans are going to win the House in the midterm elections unless they do something really stupid to mess it up, may even get the Senate. And all we're going to do is criticize what the left has been doing and criticize what the Democrats have been doing. And again, they deserve the criticism. But the problem is that that's going to be a short-lived victory, because we're not saying, yeah, they suck, but here's what we bring to the table. Here's how we're going to help. So when it comes to issues pertaining to the Black community, we really need to focus on actually developing ideas, or going with a lot of the ideas that we already have, and focus more on selling those than just to criticize what the Democrats are doing. I think most Black people know that the Democrats haven't done what they promised. They haven't really made as much of a difference. So we don't need to explain that to them. I mean, that's silly. They already know. I'm not saying that we never criticize the Democrats. We do, but we also have to say, but here's how we're going to fix it. And that's what's going to make the difference. And that's what I brought up about Jalen Johnson. He's talking about, this is what I'm going to do to fix some of the issues that are making your life harder. So that's all I'll say about that.
Okay. I'm going to bring on Tamara. And just to say once again, I don't want this to go too late. I know this is a great conversation, but I don't want the spaces to go too long. So we may just take Tamara, maybe one other person. Tamara, you can unmute yourself.
Oh, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to speak. I'm Tamara Johnson.
No problem.
Sheely, everybody.
I'm messing up everybody's name.
Oh, no worries. I answer. I just answer. But I'm Tamara Johnson Shealy. I am actually a candidate for the United States Senate here in Georgia. And thank you again for giving me an opportunity. I was listening and I was about to fall out of my chair because I'm like, I just have one question. Where are you on reparations? Because if the Republicans are really thinking that, they're going to just feed us something other than some tangibles, it's just not going to work. So where are you? Where is this room on the topic of reparations?
I can answer that, and that's a very good question. And I could tell you, running for office is a lot of work, and I really commend you for running. I ran twice for Congress. Where I'm at with reparations, we need to also see if it won't work for the by using slavery. We need to use it and to have a study and House hearings on using it starting at Jim Crow. And I think we will have a better argument and leeway if we start looking at what happened after slavery. Because I, like I said, I live in California, and recently it was a black family. It was a black couple of families, I believe. They lived in Manhattan Beach long time ago. So the government pretty much kicked them off that area and made a park and made all these other recreational. So the family sued. They sued the state of California and they received reparations. If you've seen the recent events with the Tulsa riots, the last survivors received reparations. I think we have a better, if those who want to pursue that, you have a better way of using that part of time to receive compensation. I'm currently doing my family genealogy, and it is hard to pinpoint what plantation, who, trying to get documents, and I'm using ancestry.com, and it's still hard. Where did they live? Who was the slave owner? And I haven't reached out to some great genealogists yet to find out, but it is hard. We all know that it was a lot of things that happened to us, and we feel like, I told somebody on, it was either a comment or somewhere, I mean, my parents were born in Jim Crow. So to say that something happened long time ago, it's not true, where my own parents were born during the Jim Crow era. So to see a good study, instead of using with people to speak against it as Black conservatives, I know the reparation hearing to me was not great because of who the Republicans put up to speak, to argue the point of no or yes, and to actually get people who have better historical and constitutional background to be either in favor or to against. But when I spoke to people in my area that were part of the ADOS community, I told them that, and a lot of them started understanding why. To go back to slavery, it is harder, but to actually start after Reconstruction, it will be easier to do.
Okay.
All right. Jeff, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, not much. I mean, I'm open to the idea. I would need to see how they would plan on rolling it out. I'm not very passionate about it because I'm cynical and I don't think it'll ever happen. I mean, Democrats are never, ever going to do reparations because it's too advantageous for them to pretend they're going to do it and then just never do it. The right doesn't want to do reparations. So it's not an issue I talk about a lot because, again, I'm not very passionate about it. I'm more concerned about what do we need to do as a community to close those wealth gaps and those educational gaps on our own without expecting reparations. And if it does come about and somebody has a good idea on how to implement it, fine. But to me, it just makes more sense to focus on what we can do right now to address these issues.
Okay.
Can I chime in real quick? Or I don't.
Sure.
Yeah, I think you're missing it. I think Republicans are missing the golden ticket to how you could really galvanize and get Black voters to participate on this side of the aisle. You're missing it. And those of you who are Black, it's like let me ask you, Asia and Jeff, do you know who Dr. William Darity is? Dr. William Sandy Darity, Duke University. Do you know who he is?
I personally heard it, but I have not actually dug into it.
I would encourage both of you, Jeff and Asia, his book is From Here to Equality. I would encourage you to read this book. And honestly, if you start with chapter 13 and then let's go to the front of the book, you'll answer immediately. Reparations is a debt owed. And I've had conversations with Republicans here in my state, Black Republicans, and they said that they have actually been having conversations. The conversation around reparations is happening inside of the Republican Party, but they don't call it reparations. They refer to it as an inheritance owed. Like they just don't use the word, but they're having the conversation. And I think that the Republicans are just totally missing the opportunity now to really get Black voters to engage. We're Black people. I'm a Democrat. Let me just say it because I know this room is being recorded. I am a Democrat and I run as a Democrat. And I have been asked to be on the Republican ticket because I do have some very conservative values. But I don't want to leave, and I know you guys were using the word plantation here in the room. I don't want to leave our people on the plantation. I don't want to take us from, leave us on this plantation to go to another plantation. No, I think honestly, I'm very much so an independent in my thinking. I just stay over here because that's where our people are, and I'm just not going to leave them there. But I believe that reparations is an opportunity for Republicans. There's some, I have 3 talking points. Let me share them with you because I think you guys really need to understand that Republicans, this could work and it will work. And it's going to take Republicans I just see it as a golden ticket. And first of all, let's talk about that reparations will stimulate this economy. We're real clear that when these checks are cut, what's going to happen, right? The money will be spent. It will stimulate the economy. Republicans always talk about their taxes. You're always talking about taxes. This will lower your tax burden. You got more people participating. This will lower your tax burden. Let's go there. Let's figure this out. And my third talking point is that this reparations we could eliminate or reallocate monies from dead-end social programs. And we have to go back to slavery because those of us who are descendants of chattel slavery in this country, America owes us. America doesn't owe all Black people. America only owes those of us who are descendants of chattel slavery and those of us who can trace our lineage back to slavery in this country. So it's not all Black people. So there's so much opportunity right now for Black conservatives to just take this and really push this in the party. And I don't know why how can y'all miss it, honestly? This is our golden ticket, this is our opportunity. This is your opportunity. This is how we close the racial wealth gap. Only the federal government can do this. It can't be done on a municipal level. I know you talked about Bruce Beach, and we got Evanston, Illinois, we got Massachusetts, Asheville, North Carolina. We had something come out of Oregon. Actually, we have a bill here in Georgia, to study the impact of slavery on those of us who are descendants of slaves here in Georgia. So we have initiatives, but there's no reality and there's no state that can take care of all of us who are descendants. It has to be the federal government to do this. So y'all are missing it. And I'm a Democrat telling you.
I mean, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. No. Go ahead. I just want you to. I just want y'all to catch on to this. No, I'm done, sir. This is your room. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak.
No, it's okay. It's all right. And I appreciate you adding to the conversation here. It's getting a little late. I will take one more person. So just give me 1 second here. All right, Dwayne. All right, Dwayne.
Yes. How y'all doing tonight?
Good. How
I'm
about
doing well.
yourself?
I just came in kind of on the tail end of the conversation, and I must say there were some very interesting viewpoints on this, some things that I had not thought about, and some things that I totally agree with. Um, I was not a Republican, but a conservative for quite a while. I was the first one in my family to become a conservative. And I worked with some of the campaigns here in South Carolina. Being a black conservative in South Carolina was kind of rare when I was doing it. I helped with Mitt Mulvaney's campaign when he ran for Congress against Spratt. I also helped out with Tim Scott when he was running for Senate. So I do have some background in conservatism. Now, I did become disillusioned with some of the conservative directions in the past couple of years, particularly with some of the messaging geared towards Black conservatives or some of the messages geared towards outreach towards Black people in general. And that has been discussed on here at length. But I do have a few ideas about how to make an outreach to Black people and introduce them to conservatism in a way that will get it. First and foremost, my whole philosophy is not Black conservatism or Black liberalism, but Black community. Because in the community, we do have a lot of different viewpoints. We have a lot of different philosophies. We have a lot of different points of view, experiences, likes and dislikes, just like any other community. And I think that all too often we're pigeonholed as liberals by those outside of the community, and that is untrue. But ourselves, we often spend a lot of time fighting with each other over our political labels also. And I see it quite often on this application, where you'll have Black conservatives going up against Black liberals. You have Black liberals, put out the gifts with the dancing raccoon. And then on the other hand, you have Black conservatives telling Black liberals to get out your knee pads because we know you're serving master. It does nobody any good to keep this type of language or these type of postures going if we're going to unify, because our ultimate goal should be unification as a people and appreciating our differences and celebrating our differences, because that's what makes us, I think, more unique than anyone else. Because not only do our differences come from our philosophies, but our differences come from our physical appearance. I mean, we can be as light as snow or as dark as night, but we're all connected by a common struggle, a common heritage. My thoughts on outreach are simply, as people have been talking about, just speaking with each other and talking to each other and listening to each other and finding common ideas. There are some things that I think conservatism speaks to very well. I think Asia talked about her standpoint on Black economics. I think conservatism does that very well, talking about empowerment, talking about self-worth, doing for ourselves, keeping our dollars in our community, building up our businesses and the like, creating entrepreneurs. The great thing I love about conservatism is we don't want to have a sit at the table. We want to build our own house with a table that we bought from somebody else in our community just like us. I think that's a great way to look at it. Some of the things that I like from the Democrats is that, again, they do look at the more compassionate issues, healthcare. That's one of the most frustrating. I just received my master's degree in healthcare informatics 2 Fridays ago. My reason for wanting to go into healthcare informatics is that we're in a data-driven world, and how can I use data to reach our communities to help improve the outcomes of our people in our communities? How can I do that? There are not very many Black people in the health informatic world, but I wanted to be one of those to make a difference. But healthcare in our community is abysmal. And in the conservative realm, we don't talk about that. It's all about the money, the businesses, the drive, the grind. Now it's about schools, CTE, which I'm, not CTE, I'm sorry, CRT, which, is a whole nother issue and another irritation of mine. But we're not talking about issues like healthcare, childcare. Some of the other issues that poll very strongly in the Black community as valid concerns. It's kind of comical to walk to a person who doesn't have insurance and say, hey, you need to start your own business, but they're sick and they can't really get well. Or to tell a person, hey, you know what, you need to go ahead to take these classes, but they don't have anyone to watch their children. These are issues that I think liberals are doing really well at addressing, and they're getting grind with that. I mean, this child tax credit that's going to disappear at the end of this month is going to hurt a lot of people next month on the 15th. Whether we agree with it or not, that's going to be a real issue with a lot of households in the Black community. And as a conservative, you have to prepare yourself to be criticized for that. Yes, even though people say Joe Manchin was the one who kept the bill out, he had the help of 50 other Republicans behind him that wouldn't vote for them. So how will we walk in that community and look at a single mother with 3 kids who's making less than $40,000 a year and tell her, yes, I know you're about to lose $1,800 a month, but guess what? We're going to give you a tax cut. What sense does that make to the now and then? That person is going to look at you like you got 2 heads. These are issues as conservatives, the compassionate issues, those issues like that we have to be able to address. And if we can't address them, at least we won't stand in the way of those who do it. Because in the end, it solidifies and builds up our community. From a liberal standpoint, liberals can't keep talking about defunding the police, about, doing away with bail and all of that, because our communities get hurt when we don't have that protection in there. Yes, policing needs to improve a lot. And I'm speaking from experience because my uncle was killed by the police. He was shot 6 times because he had a dog and they told him to leave from around the store. He didn't leave fast enough. And they said he pulled a knife on him. So they shot him 6 times. 6 times. He was mentally ill. Again, talk about health care. He was homeless. Again, another issue that we're dealing with, but he was expendable in the eyes of the law. So yes, we do need policing, but we need good policing. We need community policing. We need, like when I was growing up, the cops walking around the neighborhood, you know who they are and they know who you are. So we can't sit here and say defund the police and get rid of law enforcement. That's stupid, but we can improve on it. There are a lot of issues. Again, Second Amendment, I think we should have access to weapons. I don't think it should be, limited. But is that more important than our vote? I don't think so. So we have to talk to each other. We have to look towards each other. We have to realize that each side have their strengths when dealing with the community. Each side have weakness, and we have to learn from each other. We don't always have to be so rigid in our political beliefs that we're unable to see exactly or hear exactly what the other side is saying and take some of that and say, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's work together to see if we can get that going on. And my good idea, let's work together to see if we can get that done also. We are at war with each other more than we are at war with the issues in our community. And it has to stop. It has to stop. I don't know how that's going to happen because, again, we got an election coming up now in 2022. Right now, I vote for whoever I feel is going to do best for our community. I voted for, in the past election, I didn't vote. I voted for a independent president. I voted for a conservative local congressman. I voted for a Democrat senator. I voted for 2 Republicans and a Democrat on our school board. And I voted for an independent for our water commissioner. I don't care what letter is behind your name. I care what ideas in your head. Your ideas about what are you going to do to our community. So I don't want to prolong this. That's just something I had to say. And I hope and I pray that we can come together and realize what we have in common and build those commonalities and stuff and leave the politics alone. I mean, they're going to be politics, but as much as we can, let's leave that alone and not just go in there waving our banners whenever we walk into a neighborhood, because that forces people to take sides. Anyway, that's all I have. Thank you all for listening to me. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you, Dwayne. I appreciate you adding to the conversation here. We're gonna wrap up here. So I'm gonna just pose one last question to both Aja and Jeff. It was a question that someone sent to me. It's a good question. If we want to make it as quick as possible, so we're not keeping everybody here too long, but the question was posed, what's the difference, or what are the main differences between someone who is a conscious Black conservative and someone who's conservative and they're Black?
I'll let Aja take that one.
It's a group, and they asked me, if I can give good insight and opinion because I ran for Congress, and so on the political aspect, I also look at myself as helping others who want to start new things within the conservative movement. I also started reaching out to the Freedmen's movement and as well because they're in line with some of my beliefs when it comes to doing well for our communities. And when it comes to conscious, it's pretty much holding your own party accountable. It's about getting people my feelings for it and what I contribute is to get people involved in the local governments in the state. Yes, we want to get good federal representatives, but going back to basic civics, and that's what I help with the group and put in. Sorry, I'm getting over an illness. And that's what I helped with the group and getting back into basic civics 101 and how to do outreach and better messaging because, they asked me and I said, this is how messaging works when you run for politics at all levels of government. Also getting involved in how to formulate proper messages, how to get out there in the community as we discussed. And another group reached out to me and I'll be working with them in the new year because they saw I ran for Congress. How can we help people like you get elected? And how can they help me get elected when it comes to voter outreach and especially in the minority community, and especially with the Black community? But I wanted to say real quick to the lady who's running for office in Georgia, tomorrow, if you can DM me that information, that would be great. I would like to look at it and have more discussion with you. And I can also give you some of my books with Dr. Claude Anderson, Powernomics, and we can collaborate. And I really appreciate you running. We need more women and more minority women. Yes, I'm sounding sexist and biased, but more minority women to start running for office. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. I also want to touch on Dwayne real quick when it comes to medical. And this is where I go back. Yes, we do lack a lot of medical here in the community. If you ever Google or go on Amazon.com, medical apartheid, that will give you a great history of how the medical system has worked against us. So, but when it comes to conscious and Black conservatism, we do have different factions in the Black conservative movement and even in the conservative movement. You can Google those right there, factions and conservatism. But to really come together with like-minded people who see a problem and how the party is drifting one way or trying to be popular and trying to own opposition, but it's really to get back to the basic ground of the principles of conservatism and applying our different experiences and to really start educating people and to do these spaces.
Okay. Jeff, do you have a final word?
Not really. I'm glad that we had this conversation. I think that we need to have more of these. I think this format is very good for facilitating those types of conversations. So props to you, Adam. I'll be doing more of these conversations. And it's kind of been on my heart lately, like, especially when I was talking about looking for solutions and not just talking about the problem. I think that's going to come by us having this dialogue. I mean, I'm not going to say too much about what Dwayne said, but he was spot on with a lot of what he was saying. Like, he made some very good points. We can't get those good points on the regular Twitter format, right? I mean, we can tweet back and forth and have a discussion, but it's not the same thing as what we're doing now. So what I would say, we need to do as much of this as possible. I don't care who's hosting it. I don't care if it's Adam or me or both, or we both do our own thing, but no, we won't have solutions until we actually get together and brainstorm them. And I wouldn't mind having these spaces with actual Black Democrats, especially like moderate Black Democrats who actually want to solve these problems and leave the party banner behind. And I think that's actually what I want to leave with. I mean, Dwayne touched on a good point when he talked about how we're just so into our parties. I've talked about this with other friends as well. I've talked about this on other podcasts. Nothing is going to change until we have enough people on both sides who are willing to call out the divisive behavior on their own side. You know, I mean, people see me criticize Republicans all the time. I criticize conservatives all the time. I criticize Democrats too. But when I see somebody on my side that does something that I don't think is right, I'm going to say something about it. We need more people on the right who are willing to do that. We need more people on the left who are willing to do that. I don't see as many. I'm not saying that they don't do it. I'm just saying I don't see it that much. So it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that when I see, you know, Biden, or I don't care who it is on the left, they say something sideways, I don't really see them get checked. And I would love for somebody to correct me if I'm wrong and show me that I'm wrong, because that will give me encouragement. But we can't come together, like Dwayne was saying, if we have a team sports mentality. Yes, have your ideology. I'm always going to be a conservative libertarian type. That's fine. If you're more of a Democrat and you're more okay with some government, whatever, we can come together and we can have these conversations. If we're not just so stuck on my party is right all the time, no matter what, right? So I would just say we need to, again, it's the conversations that will lead to solutions. Anytime somebody's made an innovation or they've done something positive for society, it usually starts with an idea, then it starts with people talking about it, and then doing something about it. So I think that what we're doing here is great, and we just don't let the momentum go away. We need to keep doing more of this. And that's it.
Okay, great. And just to piggyback off of what you said and give my final 2 cents, not only have the conversation, whether it be through Twitter Spaces, in person, or through tweeting at each other, we need to have these conversations in good faith. Because often what I see is a lot of insinuation, a lot of filling in the blanks, and not speaking with people in good faith. Obviously, there are people who are just antagonistic, and you shouldn't talk to those people. Those people are unproductive, right? They're looking to get under your skin. They're never going to give you a chance to understand your perspective and how you're trying to advocate for certain things, or why you're saying what you're saying, right? We're all on the right. I'm sure we've all been called a coon because we had a different perspective, and that is a statement that is given without good faith. And there are a lot of great ideas that we were able to just have in this 2-hour conversation, stuff that I never really even thought about. And this is why I wanted to host, because I wanted to talk to people who thought differently than me. I wanted to talk to people who had different ideas and different solutions. Some things I kind of agree with, some things I kind of don't agree with, and even things that I need to think more about, right? So as long as we're willing to have good faith conversations, as long as we're willing to say, I could be wrong about this, right? That's how you grow. And being stringent about your ideas, or saying that, the way you think is perfect, there's nothing wrong with it. You can have your core beliefs, but sometimes it's the edges of those beliefs that need to be changed a little bit, need to be altered. In regards to the collectivist, individualism, I think all that matters is the end product a positive for Black people? Is the end result helping Black people? And all of that has to come from a positive place. So if it means being more consciously aware of Black history, so on and so forth, if that helps Black people in the end, I'm all for it. If it means being more individualistic, being centered on yourself and picking yourself up, and that helps Black people, I'm all for it. I think there are more than one way to go about it. And I really thought, between the conversations that were going on through Twitter, we have a lot in common. We want the same end result. And we have, even some of the solutions are very similar, but we're just nitpicking on, I think what Jeff was saying, like we have 90% in common. It's just that 10% that we differ on, and we're nitpicking about that 10%. So I wanted to have this particular space to talk about more so that 90%. because that's the 90% that's going to lead to us having some sort of better outcome for Black people. So that's my 2 cents to the conversation. And to wrap this up, I appreciate everybody who wanted to, listen in on this for the past couple hours. I appreciate, Aja, Jeff, Barrington, and Kris. I know that Barrington and Kris had to jump off, but I appreciate them joining this panel. If Jeff wants to do this again in the future, I'm all for it. I'm getting more and more fond of talking to Jeff. I think you're a great guy. Aja, you already know I like you. And tomorrow we're going to have another Twitter Spaces talking about crime and poverty. It's not necessarily race specific, but it's just another type of discussion. So you can join that conversation tomorrow, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard. So I'm going to wrap this up for tonight. Thank you, everybody, again. It's a blessing to have as many people listen in and join this conversation. So stay tuned. We're going to have more. You can follow me if you're not already following me. Follow the panelists. And I want everybody to have a great night. Stay safe, stay healthy.
And thank you so much, Adam and Jeff and Barrington and Kris and everybody who had concern. Have a safe holiday. Merry Christmas. And that's pretty much.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yes, can't forget that. Merry Christmas. All right, have a great night, everybody. Peace.